Lewis Hamilton is heading back to Mercedes, the team where he built his legacy. But the big question is, will he complete the season with Ferrari, or make an early switch? Will his return happen now or next year? Stay tuned until the end of the video to discover all the details. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Lewis Hamilton has once again sent tremors through the core of the Formula One landscape, not with a daring maneuver on track or a historic title-clinching performance, but with a deeply emotional, sharply worded, and completely unfiltered message that left no room for ambiguity. Through his personal Instagram account, his chosen platform for authenticity and self-expression, Hamilton confirmed the long-whispered speculation that he is returning to the team where he experienced the most dominant stretch of his career, Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. This isn't just a comeback, it's a moment of reclamation. It's a defiant and symbolic return to familiarity, belonging, and mutual understanding, after what he described as the most draining, isolating, and disillusioning period of his professional life. The post didn't rely on theatrics. There were no stylized graphics, no dramatic music, no video montage. Just a blank background, white text, and one declaration that said more than 1,000 words ever could: "Home is where the respect is. I'm coming back." In that single sentence, Hamilton didn't just confirm his future. He unveiled the emotional journey that brought him to this decision. It was a coded message to those who had questioned his role at Ferrari, to those who overlooked his contributions, and to those who underestimated his ability to walk away from toxicity. It was not just a homecoming, it was a course correction. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. In the paragraphs that followed, Hamilton gave his followers and the wider motorsport audience an unvarnished look into the reality behind the bright lights and red suits. He described an experience that started with promise but eventually twisted into something unrecognizable. While the world was fixated on the symbolism of a champion in red, Hamilton was navigating a system that slowly chipped away at his identity. He acknowledged the honor of racing for Ferrari, but was brutally honest about the emotional and psychological toll it took to stay there. According to him, the environment lacked trust, sincerity, and unity. He didn't feel celebrated, he felt tolerated. The revelation that hit hardest came as he began describing the internal climate at Ferrari, not as competitive, but corrosive. He painted a picture of a team deeply fragmented, held together not by mutual respect but by obligation, where decisions were made in silos and information was filtered according to political preferences. Hamilton didn't need to point fingers, the meaning was clear. His contributions were minimized. His experience was undervalued. And his role, no matter how significant on paper, was undermined by a structure that never intended to fully integrate him into its long-standing culture. His message also addressed his interactions with senior leadership. He never mentioned Frederic Vasseur by name, but the undertones in his words made it evident that the relationship had deteriorated beyond repair. Hamilton spoke of a lack of transparency in communications, of discussions that led nowhere, and of strategic meetings where he felt more like a witness than a collaborator. He felt unheard, unseen, and increasingly irrelevant in conversations that should have revolved around his insights. It wasn't about disagreements, it was about being systematically pushed out of the inner circle under the guise of team management. But perhaps the most emotionally charged portion of the message came when he acknowledged what fans and analysts had long suspected: the relationship with Charles Leclerc had become untenable. While Hamilton didn't resort to accusations or direct blame, he conveyed a sense of betrayal, disappointment, and estrangement. He alluded to favoritism in key decisions, unequal access to technical support, and the gradual realization that their dynamic was not based on mutual growth, but silent rivalry. He expressed the pain of realizing that team unity was a facade, that their partnership was more about coexistence than collaboration. Behind the scenes, several Ferrari insiders have since corroborated his version of events. Engineers have anonymously shared that Hamilton's feedback was often overlooked in favor of internal politics. Technical decisions that should have been neutral were allegedly influenced by behind-the-scenes allegiances. A strategist close to the team confided that Hamilton's inputs, while valuable, were regularly dismissed under the pretense of optimization for the car's direction, which sources now claim was code for favoring Leclerc's driving style. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. The result of these patterns, Hamilton revealed, wasn't just frustration, it was emotional detachment. He began questioning his place not only within Ferrari, but within the sport itself. He described weekends that felt joyless, team gatherings that felt performative, and a sense of being surrounded yet isolated. His love for racing had been infected by the emotional weight of feeling disposable. He wrote, "There's nothing more devastating than realizing the dream you sacrificed everything for doesn't see you as vital to it." The return to Mercedes is not simply about comfort. It's about alignment. It's about reconnecting with a group of people who understand his process, respect his mindset, and welcome his leadership. While Hamilton acknowledged the enormity of this decision, he made it clear that it wasn't driven by nostalgia, but by necessity. He wants to be part of a project where he is empowered to contribute fully, both in terms of driving and development. He wants a team that doesn't just call him a champion, but treats him like one. Sources close to Mercedes have revealed that the new contract includes a broader scope for Hamilton. Not only will he be racing during the 2026 and 2027 seasons, but he will also serve as a mentor to young talent within the Mercedes development program and have creative influence in areas beyond performance, such as sustainability and diversity efforts. This partnership isn't just tactical, it's cultural. Hamilton is returning to a team that not only knows how to win, but one that sees his legacy as something to be honored, not managed. The paddock has erupted in response. Journalists are scrambling to update predictions. Analysts are debating the implications for team dynamics, car design influence, and power unit development under the new regulations. Social media is in chaos, some fans mourning the end of the Ferrari dream, others celebrating the revival of a proven partnership. Sponsors, team principals, former champions, and rival engineers are all watching closely, each one understanding that this move has the power to completely shift the competitive landscape of 2026 and beyond. Ferrari's silence since the announcement has been deafening. No official statement. No farewell post. No acknowledgement from Leclerc. Sources suggest internal panic, with leadership caught off guard by the timing and tone of Hamilton's statement. The team, known for its tight narrative control, now finds itself the subject of global scrutiny, not for a strategic blunder or an underperforming chassis, but for failing to create an environment worthy of one of the sport's greatest athletes. Meanwhile, Hamilton ended his message not with vengeance, but with clarity. He didn't dwell on what was lost. He focused on what's ahead. He wrote, "I'm not going back to where I started. I'm going forward with the people who helped me become who I am. The fire's still there. The vision's sharper than ever. I'm not done. I'm just getting started again." No one can say what the next 2 years will bring. But what's now undeniable is this: Lewis Hamilton has taken back control of his narrative. He's returned not because he had to, but because he chose to. And as Formula One prepares to enter a new era of regulations, technologies, and rivalries, one thing is certain: Hamilton's story is far from over. In fact, it may just be entering its most powerful chapter yet. Would you like the continuation to include Toto Wolff's behind-the-scenes reaction, Leclerc's silent response, or how this reshapes the 2026 to 2028 F1 market dynamics? After the Austrian Grand Prix, what began as a standard post-race evaluation spiraled into something far more revealing. Within the confines of the Ferrari motorhome, during a normally structured and data-driven debriefing session, the dynamics suddenly fractured. What was meant to be a review of tire degradation, sector performance, and telemetry charts instead became a moment that exposed a raw truth simmering beneath the surface. Surrounded by engineers, technical personnel, race strategists, and senior staff, Frederick Vasseur, in what multiple internal sources later described as uncharacteristically direct, turned toward Lewis Hamilton and uttered a sentence that shifted the tone of the entire team. "You're not evolving quickly enough," he reportedly declared. "Charles is the yardstick we use now." The words, delivered without warmth, cut deeper than anyone in the room anticipated. It wasn't just feedback, it was a dismissal of status. It repositioned Hamilton, the most decorated driver in modern Formula One, not as a leader or equal, but as someone lagging behind the expected standard. That standard, the team was being told, was now Charles Leclerc. Hamilton didn't respond with an outburst. His tone didn't rise. But the energy in the room changed completely when he looked up and replied with a calm voice that held back oceans of disbelief and anger. "I didn't sign up to be someone's understudy," he said slowly. "I'm not here to be a support act in your long-term play. I'm not some background figure. I'm an 8-time world champion. That doesn't vanish because I walk into a new garage." No one moved. A laptop beeped in the corner, left untouched. Leclerc, seated across from Hamilton, didn't glance in his direction. Arms folded, expression unreadable, he remained quiet, a silence that seemed to confirm everything Hamilton had just said. From that moment onward, the fracture was no longer subtle. It was no longer whispered about. It was visible, tangible, and emotionally charged. In the days following that uncomfortable meeting, Hamilton was invited to a one-on-one sit-down with Vasseur in Maranello. The intent was damage control. But what unfolded, according to those familiar with the discussion, only made things worse. Behind a closed office door, with blinds drawn and assistants told not to interrupt, Vasseur laid out what he described as the team's long-term framework. "We need to build this team around Charles," he reportedly told Hamilton without hesitation. "He's younger, and our future is tied to him. The infrastructure, the development trajectory, it all aligns with him at the center." There was no effort to soften the message. No space for collaboration. Just a declaration of direction that felt, to Hamilton, like confirmation that he was never truly intended to be part of the inner circle. Lewis stood from his chair slowly. The disappointment was written not across his face but in his eyes. He didn't look angry, he looked let down. "That's something you should have made clear before we shook hands," he said. "If I was just here to fill a seat until Charles matures into your world champion, you should have been honest from day one." The meeting ended with nothing resolved. Hamilton walked out, not with dramatic flair, but with quiet clarity that his role in Ferrari was now defined, and it wasn't the one he had been sold. Then came Silverstone. At his home Grand Prix, with the crowd chanting his name and Union Jacks waving around every turn, the internal crisis spilled into a private driver's briefing that would later be described by those present as unrecoverable. During a heated discussion around strategy miscommunications, Hamilton questioned whether Leclerc had played a part in influencing a call that ultimately cost him crucial positions on track. Charles didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply smiled, a dry, knowing expression, and said, "The team acts in its own interest." To Hamilton, that line was more than just a corporate slogan. It was a confirmation of favoritism, of a hierarchy he had long suspected but hoped wasn't real. "No," he said, voice low but unmistakably sharp, "they act in your interest. Let's stop pretending otherwise. And don't confuse my patience for absence of strength." That single line turned the room into stone. Drivers looked at their notes. Staff glanced at each other, unsure whether to interfere. Leclerc didn't respond. He didn't need to. The damage had been done. Since that confrontation, everything has changed. The garage now operates like two separate worlds forced into the same space. Hamilton and Leclerc no longer exchange greetings. They don't share feedback. Their teams, the engineers, strategists, data analysts, have gravitated into two distinct units. What used to be a coordinated structure built for synergy is now a cold, segmented battlefield held together only by the red uniforms they both wear. Communication is minimal. Eye contact is rare. Collaboration is dead. Hamilton, once excited to don the scarlet suit and pursue a new legacy in Maranello, now appears hardened by the experience. Sources close to the team describe him as withdrawn, focused, and emotionally guarded. He still speaks to the media with grace. He still competes at an elite level. But inside the team, he's become an outsider, respected for his resume, admired for his discipline, but no longer embraced as part of the future. His feedback in meetings is often acknowledged but not actioned. His requests for setup changes are met with delay. His influence, once expected to reshape the team, now barely registers above the internal momentum behind Leclerc's campaign. Meanwhile, Charles thrives in silence. He's not boastful. He doesn't need to be. The system around him reinforces his role. The engineers know he is the priority. The strategy team tailors its simulations around his driving profile. The car development roadmap follows his feedback. He doesn't assert dominance with aggression. He does it by simply letting the structure work in his favor. And whether he admits it or not, he knows that the longer Hamilton stays in his orbit, the more fragile that balance becomes. What began as a high-profile partnership has devolved into quiet rivalry, a cold war inside the most prestigious team in motorsport. Ferrari, long known for its passion, its unity, its loyalty to tradition, now finds itself divided not by performance, but by conflicting visions of the future. On one side, a seasoned champion who came with the hope of leading a transformation. On the other, a younger, homegrown talent whose position within the system grows stronger by the day. The fans sense it. The paddock sees it. Other teams whisper about it. And yet Ferrari continues to present a polished, controlled front. But no level of media training can hide the truth forever. The energy in the garage has shifted. The morale is strained. The lines have been drawn, and the silence between the two drivers says everything. As for Hamilton, the fire hasn't gone out. If anything, it burns differently now. It's no longer just about winning races or chasing titles. It's about reminding the world, and the team that underestimated him, exactly who he is. The man who rewrote the record books. The driver who stared down adversity time and time again. The competitor who refused to be reduced to a footnote in someone else's journey. He might not have been given the keys to the kingdom, but he's still determined to leave a mark so deep that they'll never forget he was there. He didn't announce it to anyone. He didn't need to. The decision had begun forming long before words were spoken, long before anyone asked questions or raised suspicions. It wasn't the result of one catastrophic moment, but rather a gradual erosion, a slow, relentless disintegration of belief, trust, and belonging. Lewis Hamilton, once full of conviction that he could turn Ferrari into a force reborn, was no longer holding on to that vision. It had faded, not in one dramatic instant, but over countless overlooked details, ignored insights, and the relentless undercurrent of being undervalued. He had arrived at Ferrari not just as a driver, but as a symbol. A man carrying experience, legacy, records, resilience. A figure capable of galvanizing a team with his presence alone. But from the earliest days, the signals were mixed. The welcome had been warm, but calculated. The promises, grand yet vague. And slowly, over race weekends and debriefs and strategy meetings, the reality became undeniable. He wasn't being brought in to lead, he was being brought in to coexist. To orbit around a nucleus that was already being protected and prioritized. Inside the factory walls, he tried to integrate. He sat with engineers late into the evening. He asked questions. He listened. He offered input based on years of championship-level feedback. But there was hesitation. There was resistance. There were rooms where his voice didn't echo as it once had. There were glances exchanged across tables, moments when ideas were dismissed before being considered. He wasn't battling just opponents on the grid. He was navigating an invisible maze of hierarchy, loyalty, and internal politics. The deeper he tried to embed himself into the team's DNA, the more he sensed the cultural friction. It was subtle, almost unspoken. No one told him directly that his opinions weren't welcome. But actions spoke. Strategic disagreements turned into quiet exclusions. Race weekends became predictable exercises in compromise. And while the public narrative was still one of unity and shared ambition, behind the curtain, Hamilton felt increasingly isolated. He had given up so much to come here. The comfort of familiarity. The system that once revolved around him. The team principal who believed in him without conditions. The crew that understood his rhythm instinctively. And what had he received in return? Half-hearted collaboration. Diminishing influence. A teammate growing bolder by the race, emboldened by the quiet consent of leadership. That erosion of trust wasn't born in one grand betrayal. It happened in the everyday grind. The lack of eye contact in meetings. The way race engineers defaulted to Charles. The strategy shifts that weren't fully communicated. The radio calls that left him questioning whether he was driving for the same team. Outside the paddock, the world remained captivated. Fans dressed in red cheered his name. Commentators speculated on his future. Headlines praised his composure despite Ferrari's ongoing struggles. But none of them knew what was happening behind closed doors. None of them knew that, for weeks, he had been wrestling with a decision that was now no longer a matter of if, but when. And when the moment came to reach out, when the internal silence had grown too loud to bear, he didn't hesitate. He made the call. The name that appeared on his screen brought a mix of nostalgia and stability. Toto Wolff. The man who had stood beside him through some of the most triumphant and painful chapters of his life. The man who knew him not just as a driver, but as a human being. Their first conversation was guarded, friendly but filled with undertones. They talked about life. Racing. adjusting to change. Wolff didn't push. He didn't need to. He could hear the unspoken weight in Hamilton's voice. The weariness, the disillusionment, the ache for something more than what he had now. It wasn't long before the conversations became more intentional. Not negotiations, but explorations. Possibilities whispered between confidants. And then, one evening after yet another race where Hamilton had walked away from the garage with more questions than answers, the decision was made. He would fly to Vienna, not as a celebrity or media figure, but as a man reclaiming control of his story. He arrived without a team. No entourage. No leaks. Just him. The meeting space wasn't grand. It was intentionally modest. A quiet office, just beyond the spotlight, where history could begin to bend again. They spoke for hours. About the sport. About legacy. About timing. Hamilton didn't vent, he revealed. He laid bare everything that had been bottled up. The sense of disconnection, the emotional toll, the feeling that Ferrari had reduced him to a symbol, not a strategist. That they valued his name but not his mind. That he wasn't fading, he was being faded. Wolff listened, not as a boss, but as an ally. He had seen Hamilton at his most unstoppable, and at his most fragile. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. And when he finally spoke, it was with quiet authority. A voice that had guided Lewis through dynasties. "Then let's do it," he said. "Let's take back the ending. Let's write the last pages of this story the way they were meant to be told. No interference. No confusion. Just you, the car, and the road ahead." It wasn't a sales pitch. It was a lifeline. And Hamilton, who had spent the past year drowning in ambiguity, finally saw the surface again. It wasn't just about coming back. It was about being seen again. Heard. Respected. Invited to lead, not tolerate. When the meeting ended, there were no dramatic farewells. Just a mutual understanding. A shared certainty. And when Hamilton stepped back into the Vienna night, the cool air felt different. Lighter. Sharper. The world hadn't changed, but his direction had. He returned to Ferrari physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, he had already departed. The suit still bore the prancing horse. The badge was still stitched onto his chest. But the fire that had once driven him to make Maranello his final home had been extinguished. What remained now was resolution. The exit wasn't yet public. No press release had been drafted. But the decision had been made. Quietly. Powerfully. Irreversibly. Following that powerful private exchange between Hamilton and Wolff, the atmosphere inside Mercedes didn't shift immediately on the surface, but behind the scenes, a quiet revolution had begun. It was subtle, deliberate, and protected from the outside world. There were no headlines. No whispers in the press. Just a growing sense that something transformative was taking root, an unspoken agreement between two men who had once dominated the sport and knew, intuitively, that their shared legacy still had unfinished chapters left to be written. The process that unfolded afterward didn't resemble traditional contract negotiations. There were no drawn-out battles over performance bonuses, media clauses, or exit options. This wasn't a game of leverage. It was an emotional and spiritual restoration of something far more significant than ink on paper. It was about rewriting a narrative that had been twisted, bruised, and interrupted. Mercedes, longing to restore the essence of what once made them unshakable, didn't view Hamilton through the lens of past glories or fading stardom. They saw him as the emotional center of gravity that could realign everything. Not just the driver with the most wins or the fiercest qualifying pace, but the individual capable of reawakening belief inside the walls of Brackley and across the global fanbase. He wasn't a symbol. He was the soul of their identity. Hamilton entered these talks with clarity, not the kind born from strategy meetings or PR briefings, but from lived experience. He didn't carry bitterness, but he came with conviction. He wasn't looking for ceremonial respect. He wanted truth. He insisted on transparency, integrity, and most importantly, equality. True equality, not the type that lives in public statements but dissolves in backroom discussions. No more navigating political undercurrents. No more quiet sidelining. He was either part of the foundation or not involved at all. Toto Wolff didn't resist. He didn't negotiate the terms of that condition. He didn't ask Lewis to meet him halfway. He gave a simple, unflinching yes. Because this wasn't about appeasement. It was about acknowledgement. Wolff knew the team had drifted, not just in performance, but in spirit. And if there was any hope of rebuilding something real, Hamilton's presence wasn't optional, it was essential. The talks moved with surprising speed. Legal teams coordinated with precision, but their work was mechanical, formalizing something far more powerful that had already been decided by heart. Internal meetings were rare and kept to only those who absolutely needed to know. The emotional intensity of the moment demanded privacy. It wasn't about press management. It was about protection, of the trust being rekindled, of the fragile new ground being built. Both Hamilton and Wolff agreed. The news would remain silent until the moment felt right. No staged leaks. No media rehearsal. No carefully worded leaks to friendly insiders. This wasn't a PR maneuver. This was personal. And the only person with the right to break the silence was Lewis himself. That moment arrived today, August 8th. He didn't orchestrate a media campaign. He didn't schedule an interview with a glossy magazine. Instead, he posted a single image to his personal Instagram account. Simple, stark, and unforgettable. A grayscale photograph, shot candidly, showing Hamilton looking off into the distance, eyes filled with reflection and calm determination. No helmet. No logos. No performance suit. Just him, unmasked. His caption didn't shout. It whispered. But the words cut with precision and force. To the ones who remembered me when others stopped looking, thank you. You kept the light on. The message was layered. A quiet thank you to those inside Mercedes who never abandoned him. An acknowledgement of the quiet loyalty that kept him grounded even when the noise around him told a different story. A moment of truth for a man who had been surrounded by narratives he didn't write, and was finally ready to reclaim his voice. He continued, addressing those who had stood beside him during the months of confusion, tension, and silence. To those who saw me when I was no longer winning, you didn't cheer results. You saw the person. This was more than gratitude. It was vindication. A powerful recognition of the supporters who had embraced his humanity, not just his statistics. Who understood that greatness isn't measured in lap times alone, but in how a man rises when everything around him falls away. And then came the most powerful line of all, the moment that turned this quiet announcement into a seismic cultural shift across the racing world. The color wasn't the issue. It was the chill beneath it. The looks that said nothing. The absence of fight when it mattered. Respect doesn't come from paint. It comes from presence. Without naming the team, he named the truth. It wasn't Ferrari's car that had broken him. It was the emotional distance, the sterile environment, the absence of warmth and mutual defense when he needed it most. He wasn't betrayed by the Scuderia's performance. He was let down by the silence when it mattered most, not in the media, but in meetings, in moments of vulnerability, in small decisions that spoke louder than press releases ever could. In a few short lines, he exposed the disconnect between image and reality, the contrast between a legacy car and a legacy culture. And while fans had speculated for months about what had truly happened behind closed doors at Maranello, Hamilton's words didn't just confirm suspicions, they delivered a poetic eulogy for a relationship that never became what it promised. The online reaction was immediate and staggering. Within minutes, the post had gone viral. Celebrities, athletes, political figures, musicians, and current drivers shared it, commented on it, and quoted it. Motorsport forums lit up with interpretations, emotional responses, and renewed admiration. But most of all, there was a collective exhale, a sigh of relief that he was finally back. Not just back in a car. Back in control of his story. Back in a space where his presence wasn't tolerated, it was needed. Back in a team that understood that legacy isn't earned in one season. It's forged in fire, tempered by struggle, and sustained by truth. And as the engines prepare to roar again, everyone now knows this isn't just about a return to Mercedes. It's a reclamation of soul. It's a revival of a partnership built not just on speed, but on trust, depth, and history. Hamilton isn't chasing redemption, he is becoming the definition of it. And with every post, every word, every lap he's about to complete, one truth now rings louder than ever. He never really left. They just finally started listening again. He closed his announcement with an image that struck a chord in every corner of the racing world. No need for a press conference, no orchestrated video montage, no dramatic soundtrack, just a quiet, powerful photo. Hanging in a dimly lit garage, barely illuminated by soft overhead lighting, was his original Mercedes racing suit, the one he wore during the early chapters of his historic journey. It wasn't brand new. It showed signs of age, of use, of meaning. There it was, still, waiting. The caption below didn't scream. It whispered with conviction, "Coming home. 2026. Let's finish this right." That single phrase, paired with that understated image, sent digital platforms into immediate meltdown. Fans gasped, screamed, cried, shared. Within seconds, the news was trending in over 50 countries. The image itself began appearing on everything: Twitter timelines, Reddit threads, TikTok videos, Instagram reels. It wasn't just a post. It was a moment. A return that felt both inevitable and revolutionary. The man who redefined an era was signaling his next, and possibly final, mission. The reaction wasn't limited to the fanbase. Within minutes, teams across the paddock were caught off guard. Journalists scrambled to verify what many had suspected but never dared to say out loud. Industry insiders began sending cryptic messages. People inside Brackley celebrated. Emotions overflowed. There were cheers in engineering bays, knowing smiles in meeting rooms, and a renewed sense of direction across the Mercedes camp. The words weren't long, but their weight was unmistakable. Hamilton was coming back, not as a shadow of his former self, but as a man with a purpose. Mercedes, in their usual understated manner, didn't release a press statement bloated with formalities. They didn't need to. Their official channel simply posted 3 words, "He's coming home." Alongside it, a subtle animation of his original helmet resting on the nose of a silver car under soft lighting. That was all it took. It hit like an emotional freight train. Longtime fans wept. Newcomers began Googling his stats. The world, all over again, turned its eyes toward the man who had already conquered so much, and yet clearly had more to say. In stark contrast, Ferrari offered nothing. Not a tweet. Not a sentence. No goodbye, no gratitude. The silence from Maranello was not just noticeable, it was symbolic. It reflected more than oversight. It pointed to a rift that ran deeper than contracts or performance. It exposed something raw, unresolved. Some speculated the silence was a show of pride. Others saw it as an admission of failure. Regardless of interpretation, the message was clear. The story had ended, and not on good terms. What makes this return so extraordinary isn't just the name on the garage door. It's the timing. It's the emotion. It's what this comeback represents in a broader sense. Lewis Hamilton isn't rejoining Mercedes simply to win races. He's not chasing another title for the sake of numbers. He's coming back to reclaim a piece of himself that had been lost in the noise. After an emotionally taxing period at Ferrari, riddled with misunderstandings, creative constraints, and ideological misalignment, he's reuniting with the only organization that allowed him to lead as more than just a driver. Sources close to the situation describe his final months in red as exhausting. Not because of the car or the pressure, but because of the silence around him. Decisions made without him. Meetings where his ideas were dismissed. Media narratives he couldn't correct. Values he couldn't express. Ferrari, for all its legendary prestige, reportedly asked Hamilton to quiet parts of himself he had long fought to amplify. And for someone like him, whose entire legacy has been built not just on what he did on track but how he carried himself off it, that was unacceptable. Back at Mercedes, it's different. It always was. The leadership knows him, not just statistically, but personally. They understand what he brings beyond telemetry. They know that when he speaks, it's worth listening. That his insight into development, culture, and mindset is irreplaceable. In Brackley, his voice was never muted. It was magnified. And now it's back. Internally, the entire team has already shifted into a new gear. Engineers are dusting off old data with new energy. Performance analysts are recalibrating long-term goals. Younger team members, who grew up watching Hamilton dominate, are now preparing to work alongside the very man who inspired their careers. The anticipation is not about reliving the past. It's about building something new with someone who understands the weight of legacy and the importance of evolution. The commercial effect has been seismic. Hamilton's return has reignited interest in Formula One at a level rarely seen outside championship deciders. Merchandise flew off shelves within hours of the announcement. Streaming platforms reported record spikes in highlight reels. Broadcast partners began revamping 2026 promo campaigns. Even brands unaffiliated with F1 began circling. Because Hamilton's return isn't just a sporting event. It's a movement. It's a signal that the most compelling stories aren't written in datasheets, they're told through resilience, grit, and choice. Fellow drivers responded with a mix of admiration and introspection. Some posted emojis. Others issued heartfelt tributes. There was no jealousy, only recognition. Hamilton's decision to come back, especially under these circumstances, was seen not as a flex of power, but a return to purpose. For many within the paddock, it was a reminder of why they began this journey in the first place. His return also speaks volumes about what matters most at this stage in his journey. He isn't chasing validation. He isn't trying to silence critics. He's already a global icon, a record breaker, a legend whose achievements cannot be rewritten. What he's seeking now isn't a trophy, it's closure. The kind of conclusion that honors the complexity of the path he's walked. The kind of final act that allows him to leave the sport not out of frustration, but with peace. Hamilton is returning not because he needs to prove something to the world, but because he refuses to compromise who he is. His comeback is not about revenge. It's about realignment. It's a personal decision made with clarity, not ego. And it is precisely that restraint, that maturity, that makes it so compelling. He's not coming back as a broken man desperate for redemption. He's returning as someone who knows his worth, who understands the power of place, and who sees unfinished lines in his story. And now, the countdown begins. The regulations will change. The cars will evolve. The grid will shift. But one thing will remain constant. The eyes of the world will follow Lewis Hamilton as he steps back into the only place that ever truly felt like his. Not because of comfort, but because of connection. Not because of ease, but because of mutual respect. This is not a comeback. This is a continuation, on his terms. And everyone, everywhere, is ready to watch.